Hey, welcome to the Elle Russ Show. My name is Elle Russ, and I am a #1 bestselling author and master coach. My intention is to inspire, educate, and motivate you with weekly content featuring amazing guests and solo episodes. Visit my website, elleruss.com, to learn more about me, my courses, free masterclasses, partner discounts, and much more. Enjoy the show. Thomas Sterner, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So, Thomas is the author of The Practicing Mind, fully engaged in his most recent book, It's Just a Thought, Emotional Freedom Through Deliberate Thinking. You know, in looking over your website, and it's perfect because right off the bat, one of the first things you see is sort of like learn how to start, like ready to learn how to love living. And look, Thomas, I know I used to be one of these people back in the day too. There's so many people just in and out with the daily grind, and they're sitting there going, what's this about? Is this really my whole life? Like, they don't have anything new, exciting. They're waiting for something. So before we get into that, how did you get into this? How did you get into deliberately coaching yourself in the present and then moving on to help others with it?
Well, I'll try to be as concise as possible. When I was young, I've always been very creative. I've learned how to do many things in my life, and that's a question people ask me: is there anything you don't know how to do? Because it seems like I know how to do a lot of things, and my response is, well, there's nothing I want to know how to do that I don't know how to do. There's plenty of things I don't know how to do, but I was very creative, and that's a mind that is very active, and it's always jumping around and looking at other things and saying, oh, well, that would be fun to do. That would be fun to learn. And so my mind was very active. I was not disciplined at all. And I also would say I was quite a bit of a worrywart. I worried about things incessantly. And, when I was in I would say probably late years in high school, I realized that I wasn't happy with the way that I was processing life, if I could say it that way. And there had to be a better way. And I didn't have the faintest idea what that was, but I knew that I couldn't go through the rest of my life like that. So when I got into college, my freshman year, a very close friend of mine that I had grown up with handed me a book that was from his philosophies course, and it was Religions of the World. And I didn't have any experience in any of that, but I was really a pretty spiritual person. So I just started reading about all the different religions. And I just ate it up. I was very fascinated by the Eastern thought. And I found that when I began to focus on being in the present and being non-judgmental, it completely changed my experience in life. And it also changed my ability to pick a goal and to achieve the goal. And, from there, it went into sports psychology and neuroscience and performance psychology, all these things that, have really come about in the last, say, 25 to 30 years because they didn't exist before. And we have learned so much about how the mind works, the mind-body connection, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, how they communicate with each other. And it struck me that most of the time, and this has certainly been documented with peer-reviewed science, and they have a number for it where they say about 95% of the time we are not actually creatively thinking and living our lives. We're living programs that either we have installed unintentionally. We're installing them whether we know we are or whether we know it or not. The system is always running, and or that other people. We have reacted to situations based on what other people's reaction to our actions have been. And that has installed behaviors in us and certain types of reactions. And so what happens is stimulus happens out in front of us, whether that's visual or oral, and that the subconscious goes and gets that program and runs it. And we're in the program, and we don't know that we're in the program because it feels like we're in control. And so we don't live a deliberate life. We live a life that is manipulated by the programs that are running, that have been installed inside of us. And I tell this story many times. I had a very high level CEO one time, and we were having this conversation, and he said that he didn't buy into that. He felt that he was the thinker of his thoughts. And because I said, most of the time we are not the thinker of our thoughts, we're being thought. And he said, I think I make my decisions on how I'm going to, handle a situation. And so to make a point with him, I blindsided him and I just said, did I tell you to talk? I told, you sit there and you keep your mouth shut until I tell you to talk. Well, he became offended, of course, which I knew he would. And when he got that look on his face and, got all brustled, I said, you see, I just manipulated you. I said, because I knew that you would have a reaction stored for someone talking to you that way. I said, you really didn't make a decision to feel as uncomfortable as you do right now, to feel angry, to feel upset, to feel defensive. You didn't make the decision to do that. It just happened to you. And it was a real awakening for the guy. It was pretty fun to see. He just started to laugh and he said, thank you for the awakening. He goes, I get it. He said, you're right. I did not participate in any of that. He said, I just basically became that. So where do we go from here? So my point is that we don't live our lives deliberately, but the good news is that we know how to do it now. If another story that I tell is if you go back for thousands of years, we wanted to fly and people tried to fly and they were smart people. They were hardworking people. They were good people. They weren't all scientists or anything, but they all failed. And many of them were killed. And the reason wasn't because we weren't capable of flying. It was because we didn't understand flight. We didn't understand lift. And that became a known quantity when we discovered how the Bernoulli principle, which was really studying fluid, and air as a fluid, how that related to lift and flight. And once we understood that, all of a sudden, flight took off. It was a matter of a few decades, after thousands of years, a few decades, we had airplanes that were flying hundreds of miles an hour at 25,000 feet. I mean, it was an amazing takeoff, but it all came from just understanding how lift and thrust and drag and all that, how that is affected and how to control it. And so now we're in that place with our thoughts. We understand where our thoughts come from, where our emotions come from, how we're manipulated by our thoughts. And we can be deliberate. And that's real freedom as far as I'm concerned, Al. Without that, I don't care how much money you make. If right. Like the CEO, he's not, wasn't in control. And all it took was somebody to say something and he completely surrendered his emotional sense of security and contentment. He surrendered all of that to just a few words that came out of my mouth. And so that's what we're talking about.
I want to throw out a couple things. The first thing is you mentioned that you had once been quite a worrywart, right? You know what I mean? And it always brings me to the Mark Twain quote, which is like so true in so many people's lives, which is, I've been an old man and I've had many worries in my life, most of which have never happened. Why? What is it about us? I know there's some primal conditioning. I'm a paleoancestral expert. I understand the need for looking out for danger, our ego being alert for these kind of things that are primed into us. But why is it that we are spending the day spinning the wheels in the head about things that haven't happened yet, right? Worries and negative things that could potentially happen versus what you, me, and I think people are trying to do now is use deliberate thought and thinking and turning these things around. So can you touch on that a bit? Why is it as humans that we're going in that direction until we have to consciously do it the other way?
Well, there was a saying by a yogi that said the reason we grow old is because we see everybody around us growing old. And we are conditioned by everything that we see is worrying. What could go wrong? I mean, I know like you said, some of it is natural because it's a survival thing, but it is the driving force of marketing and media is you're incomplete, and that's why you feel the way you do, and you can't these are the things you need for that feeling to go away, and you don't have them. And so we're always in a position like, what if I lose my job? What if I don't have enough for food? And that stuff has it's certainly in the last couple of years has been really pushed on us, by all the things that could happen to us. And if you're really a victim of watching the news media, I watch these things from it's like I'm watching something that isn't true. I watch how it's played out. Like I watch, what are they talking about? Well, they're telling me there was a fire in a townhouse 100 miles from my house. Well, that's not news. It's a terrible tragedy for the person and the family that is involved in that. But that's the kind of stuff that is just constantly pushed in front of our face. If we were to take the media and turn it around so that we were talking about all the wonderful things that are happening in the world and all the positive things that were happening, the energy that we would be putting into our consciousness and that would be going out there would turn everything around. And this is quantum physics. It's just a fact. Like, just because you don't believe in something or you haven't heard about it doesn't mean it's not true. So I think that, the direct answer to your question is I think that we are like what we see everybody else worrying, and that is what we're programmed to worry. We're always talking about scarcity. We're always worrying about lack, and it becomes habitual behavior because your subconscious is running. It's an elegant recording system, but it does not think. It's not critical. It doesn't have a sense of humor. It just watches what is happening out in front of you and what your reaction to it is. And then it assumes that your reaction is the truth. It assumes that, well, when a person talks to you this way, when a certain circumstance comes up, the way you feel is the way you should feel and the way you want to feel. And so it writes the program for that and puts it in, and that becomes your habitual response to that behavior. And you're not in control of that if you're not aware that that's the system that you're living in. And so that is what has happened. We have been programmed to worry constantly, and we can just as plainly, I don't want to say easily, because people think like, yeah, well, that's work to change it. Well, what's your point? You have a choice, I don't really understand. Yeah, it's all work. You can make the effort once you understand the mechanics of anything. Everything in life is a skill, whether that's learning to walk or button your shirt or put a spoonful of food in your mouth. It's all a skill. Once you master it, it becomes more and more effortless. And then eventually it's just who you are. And so when you look at changing the way that you process events and how you see things, and when you begin to get outside of that loop through thought awareness, then you begin to see, like for me, when something happens and I feel it makes me feel, say, anxious or stressed, my interpretation of that is not to be in the stress. My interpretation is, I'm in the process of mastering this, because anything I've already mastered, I don't notice because it just flows so effortlessly. So because I'm feeling resistance to this, I'm feeling a way that I would not choose to feel. That means I'm in the process of learning how to deal with this particular situation. So my interpretation is, well, good, because I want to be good at this situation. I don't want this situation to feel uncomfortable or feel like a struggle. It's just, when you have feelings that are uncomfortable, those are just labels. The feelings don't know they make you feel bad. They're just data. It's like something happens and you get this data that comes in to your consciousness, and you interpret that data. You can interpret the data as, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Or, well, here's a situation that I have not mastered yet. And I can say, I've been through it all. I've been broke. I've had money. I've been divorced. I've lost quite a few people in my family to cancer. And I've been there, some of them young, and I've been there with them all the way to their last breath. And I will tell you that you do have a choice in how you experience those things. As if you just take someone dying, the choice that I made, the most recent death that I went through in the family, was my father, who was, almost 90. And I took care of him all the way up until the end. And I was able to make, because of what I've done for a living and what I've learned, I was able to say to myself, how do I want him to experience this? And part of that was, how do I want him to experience me experiencing it with him? Yeah. And I made that choice. And did I get upset over it? Were those feelings knocking at the door? Of course they were. But they were not in control. They were behavioral responses that we've learned, but I had made the choice that my thinking in this will be deliberate. He will experience this the way that I can help him experience it. And when he sees me dealing with him, he will see the person he wants to see. I have the ability to do that. And if I want to get upset, I can get upset later. It's like when you fly an airplane, they teach you all these skills, like about, like, if you lose the engine, you do this. If you have a fuel problem, you do this. An electrical problem, you do this. So everything is figured out before you get in the situation. And it's really very much like that. Like how, what I could pretty much predict how I would feel in that situation. So when that happens, if I could be any person I want in that situation, if I could handle that situation any way I want, what does that look like? I'm not going to wait until I'm in the situation to try to figure that out, because it's pretty hard to do that, because the emotional content is so strong. And the behaviors that you have installed, they are very, very strong. And so they're going to be right there. And when those, that system, when it's working for you, man, it's fantastic, because it really carries you through. But when it's working against you, then it has just as much strength when it's working against you. And so you have to realize that. And so when it does push back, you have to be like, yeah, it's a pushing back. I expected it to. Just like, with my father, it's like, yeah, I'm feeling upset inside. I expected to. Here it is, right on time. Like, but I was very anchored in the observer of that, as opposed to just being in the emotional content of the moment. And that's a skill. It's a skill that we can all learn. And it, boy, what else is there? When you have that, man, you're in control, and you have real freedom.
Well, I love that. And when you mentioned the example of that guy who you sort of initially were condescending and manipulative to for the purposes of that exercise. And I just want to throw this out to the audience, because I think you would agree. It's not to say that Tom is saying you can get to a point where nothing will ever irk, react, or trigger you. You could for some things. It's really about what you're doing with it. And this goes back to philosophy. I have a degree in it. A lot of the ancient Greeks, one of the things they talk about is basically like, it's what you do with the information. And so my work being similar to yours, my second book, I talk about something called Be Careful on the Send. And this is not only the situation where we're all hot on something and we press the send on the email and then we sleep on it. We're like, shit, I shouldn't have done that. Fuck, I could have waited. Damn it. I can't take it back. Right. We've all been there. But I think that Be Careful on the Send also is in the moment of, so I've noticed this with myself with certain things. We all have our things, right, that would trigger or not trigger us. And I can say that it is a much better life to be able to stop for a minute, be able to be aware, right? Just be aware of the, ooh, I just got a gut punch there. Ooh, my heart just dropped into my stomach. Hold on. Not a good feeling. That is a very like subconscious reactive programming type of thing, unless someone just pulled a knife out on you, right? So in these moments, to filter through it, wow, the outcome is always better. The heart rate goes down. Now we're talking health. Now we're talking not having cortisol surge through our bodies for 15, 23 hours because you're still bitching about, right, the situation. So let's talk about just for people getting started with this, where they're like, yeah, my mind's out of control. I am reactive. I'm regretting. I'm doing a lot of fucking sends. I should be careful. What can they think about the next time a yucky emotion comes up? And again, let's just say it's not in an immediate danger situation or someone did just drop dead, of course. But, these things throughout life, someone triggers you, a family member says something, you're like, this fucking uncle again with my uncle or whatever. What can someone do in their head in that moment to dial it back and be able to be aware and get a hold of the emotion and to be able to process it better and have a better outcome?
Well, the first thing you have to have is you have to have the awareness and the experience of, for any of this stuff, Al, I don't care what you're talking about here, for any self-transformation, for anything, you have to have the awareness that you're not your thoughts. That comes from like, well, then who are you? Well, you are the observer of the thoughts. That's where you live. And most people live in their thoughts. And so to carry that through, like what you're saying, like if in order to not send the thing you don't want to send, you have to get yourself separated from that whole routine of getting ticked off and then pushing the send button and saying all this stuff. I remember one time I had a disagreement with a business with someone I wasn't a partner with, but someone I had to deal with business wise, and he sent me this very very irate email, and he was completely wrong, and he was wrong because the community that we were both in had basically ostracized him, and this is why. So he sent me this email that was very attacking, and so I responded to it. Now, my father had been very high in negotiating skills and had done a lot of that in the corporate world. So I let him read it, my response, before I sent it, and he said, "Well, you had a lot of things to say, and you said them. Now rewrite it." And he said, "Now that he goes, now rewrite it." He goes, "Because this will be out there forever, and you don't want him to be able to use it against you." He said, "So you need to come back at this from a professional standpoint and say what you need to say, but in a way that there is no way that it can be used and turned back on you." Now, the reason that was so valuable was because it was what he was basically giving me was a glimpse of what it feels like to be separate from, the thought, to be able to notice I'm having this thought. I'm not the thought. I'm having this thought. This thought is being created and it's happening to me. And the thought is creating all the emotional content that I'm feeling and the hormones and everything that are flooding my body and the fight or flight or whatever that is. But I am outside of that. I am not that. It's happening to me. So how do you do that? Well, you have to. I mean, I've studied this for a long time. You have to spend, I tell all of my clients, look, you got to spend 10 minutes a day in some sort of a simple meditation practice. You have got to, if you're not willing to do that, then you really don't want to change. Like where I'm asking you for 10 minutes. If you can't come up with 10 minutes a day, then you need to clear your schedule. Like there's so many things that people do during the day, whether it's texting or whatever, that are feeding so much of this problem as opposed to giving them the tools to escape. But the very first thing you have to do is get to a place where you experience the difference between being in your thoughts and noticing what your mind is doing without your permission, because that's what you're describing. When if you say to somebody, if you had a choice, would you like to be calm in this situation or would you like to be ranting? And completely surrendering.
No one's choosing that. Yeah, no one's
right.
Choosing.
You're the only one. Everybody else is. You're just like the CEO I talked about. He didn't make a choice to get upset. I chose it for him. So do you want to be making the choice, or do you want somebody or a circumstance to be making the choice? Well, how do you get to where you're making the choice? Well, you have to be able to see, you have to be able to give yourself the privilege of choice. And the privilege of choice comes from separating yourself and saying, I have a choice here. I can allow this situation to be in control, or I can be in control. Which one do I want it to be? And to get to there, you have to know what your mind is doing without your permission. And in this case, it's what your subconscious is the program that it got, it's file, 303-AC, just got that file and it's going to run it because, as far as it's concerned, this is what you want because this is the way you've always reacted to situations like this. Okay. Well, if you don't want that file to run, you can't be in the file and in the play. You have to be able to separate yourself from that. And you have to experience the fact that I am not the thoughts. I'm the one that I want to be the. If we're doing this 95% of the day, I used to do a program called 5% Thinking. Where I would say, well, let's take that 5%. What happens if we bump it up to 25%? Man, that's a whole different paradigm. So instead of being run by our thoughts and the situations around us, let's change that and let's experience what it feels like to be the watcher, the noticer of the thoughts. And then when you notice that thought and you're separated from it, that's when you have the opportunity to say, is this how I want to respond to this? Or do I need to take a few minutes? And I'm not telling people, look, I'm not saying you never squash somebody, because sometimes people need to be squashed, and if they need to be squashed, then you should be in control of squashing them. When I say that, I mean, you don't want to get when you pull the trigger, you want what comes out of the barrel to be what you want to come out of the barrel. You don't want to give up your self-control. You want to, and I've done that, with people where I've seen them, they're just stepping all over people and nobody ever bites back. And, you say to yourself, this person really needs to get stepped on here. And here's my opportunity to do it. And I am giving myself permission to do it. And when you're in that place,
Very East Coast of you, Tom. I like it. I'm from downtown Chicago. I appreciate this time. This is my philosophy too. I write a lot about this, but actually, you know what? I wanted to go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, no, what I was going to say is when you are in that place, you have access to your full cognitive faculties. Yeah. Because you haven't surrendered to anger and all this sort of stuff. And so, you can take the person down one step at a time and enjoy the lesson that you're giving the person and not be drawn into it emotionally and getting anger, because as soon as you do that, you start relinquishing a certain amount of your cognitive abilities.
So I wanted to, I'd love you to, I'm going to share an example of what you're talking about from my own personal life that I shared in my second book, which is I have a thing about me. And actually I found out someone who came on the show who talked about the Enneagram. This is actually very in line with my number, which is I have a thing about underdogs. And so also if I see injustices places, I have had the bad fortune of jumping in when it's not my place. Now, sometimes when it's not been my place, it's worked in a great way, but this is an area where the feeling will happen, the compulsion to go and rescue, go and save, or go. I mean, and this could be anything. It could be like I'm somewhere public and I hear a man say something really horrible to his girlfriend or something. And I just want to be like, hey, what the fuck are you? Like, this is my compulsion to do this. Okay. So I realized this about myself and I was like, look, I can't keep jumping into other people's battles. I can't also be the one, because I wrote a book called Confident as Fuck. Of course, people come to me and they're like, hey, so-and-so's having an issue. Can you be the one to say something? Like, I got to go be the one to go bring up something that's really not my business. It's not a close friend. It's not and so it's tough. And in these moments, I would struggle because I would just do it. And then I learned over time, when I get the feeling, I have to really stop and do some critical thinking about it. And often I don't make the choice anymore. And sometimes I do, but it's at least after some conscious deliberation over the pros and cons of me perhaps doing that. And sometimes the last time it happened, it was about an hour working with me and a friend who was a coach. And I had to just go through all of the things on weighing whether or not I was going to. And again, it wasn't even something that was my business. So I've had to, what I call, choose my battles wisely. Right. And that's been my thing that I've had to be aware of. I mean, I'm sure there's others. So I'd love to know an example of something specific from your life, from how you used to be or think or react, in any kind of situation. And then how you were able to go, okay, that's my thing. And now I need to hone it in and be aware, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, like I said, when you're a worrywart, you're not in control. Like when you're a worrywart, everything around you is in control. And, one of the things that I say to my clients is in certain, when we're talking about specific situations is, I think you should give yourself permission to do this or that. Like, and an example that to me, when I can say that comment to myself, it's a clue to me that I'm in control, not the situation. So here's an example of one that happened in my life. I happened to be out to dinner with some people, and it was one of the people was a woman I was dating. I didn't know her friends. There was a husband and wife that we were meeting, and I didn't know them. But she warned me before we went into the restaurant that the husband of her girlfriend could be extremely condescending and arrogant. Oh. So I, of course, I don't know.
That would be the toughest challenge for me. They should film that, because that would be, yeah.
Well, she said he's not into the stuff that you're into, so he would be very critical of it. And I said, well, gotcha. I won't talk about it. Yeah. So we went in, and somehow she and her girlfriend got on the subject of acupuncture and talking about how helpful it could be and everything. And I'm just sitting there being polite, and I don't, I hadn't said hardly anything. And the guy just started chewing them to pieces. Like he didn't believe in it, and it was a bunch of, junk. And, and his wife said, well, if it helps somebody and they feel like it helps them, what's the problem with it? And he just kept stepping on them. And I thought, man, this guy's unbelievable. So eventually I just couldn't keep my mouth shut, but I didn't want to be arbitrary, argumentative. I just said some supporting information about acupuncture to support the women. And he said, you'd have to prove that to me. And I looked at him and I said, who the heck do you think you are? I gave myself permission to do this. That's my point. And I said, who the heck do you think you are? And I said, I don't need to prove anything to you. I said, I've spent 4.5 decades studying this stuff while you were watching cooking shows. I knew this because they told me he liked to watch cooking shows.
Nice.
And
nice.
I said,
keep it in the back pocket just in
that's
case.
Right. And I said, I said, like, I don't have to, I said, if you want to live in your ignorance, I said, that's your choice. I said, but I'm way past you. And I said, if you do want to get in the boxing ring and go toe to toe with me for this, I said, you're going to need an IQ bigger than your shoe size. And from what I've heard coming out of your mouth so far, you're a long way from that. I suggest you just sit there and listen, and you might learn something. And that was it. Like,
did that shut him down? Did that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he and his woman.
By the way, I want to stop you right there and I want to highlight this because I'm sure some of my audience who knows me is probably like, oh, Elle probably loves this guy, because that's what I kind of call in a nice way, like kind of going Chi-town on someone from downtown Chicago, and we kind of tell it like it is, and we just call it out, and there's not even really much emotion covered. He's just like, hey, here are the facts, calling someone on their bullshit, and like, let's end this. You know what I mean? And often when there's a bully around in any kind of capacity, like you're talking about, and I always say this, when you call a bully on their shit in the right way, they just shut it.
They do. And because he didn't have a response. Anybody can say, I don't believe that. Well, just because you don't believe it doesn't make it true. I don't believe the sky's blue. So like, that doesn't mean that the sky isn't blue. And this is, so to me, the woman that I was dating did tell me later, she said her girlfriend was so thrilled. She said, nobody ever stands up to him. And, and for me, I wasn't angry. When I finished that, I just said, are we ready to order? Cause I'm hungry. Like, I just kind of like, I've said what I needed to say, where I stand, like, and if you want to go further than this, bring it on. But like I said, as you said, this guy he was truly inappropriate and condescending and really unkind and uncalled for to his wife, who, she doesn't know me. I mean, the whole thing was just out of place. And the fact that this person was so comfortable being so inappropriate to me was when going back to the beginning, I just said, Tom, I'm giving you permission to step on this guy because it's not going to take a whole lot of effort to do it. And so, like,
also too, someone's energy like that, you can't bottle it. It's all over the place, and like, it ruins the energy. And if you have a chance to shift it, you can. I talk about this somewhere else in detail, but cliff notes is I had a similar situation where no one had ever called the abusive husband, verbally abusive husband out. None of the friends, they would just prefer to not hang out with the husband. So for years, it was just that people would just try to ask the girl to go hang out by themselves and avoid him, because when they're around him, they experienced in front of him, like this kind of guy's behavior, but they never said anything. And then it happened around me, and I didn't accept it, and I did squash it. And it led to the best outcome possible, which was her really realizing that she was with a horrible, toxic person. And she ended up leaving him, and then called me a year later, and she's now remarried. But she ended up calling me a year later, and she goes, I just want to let you know that even though that moment and that day you were harsh, don't you ever feel bad about for a second, because it changed the trajectory of my life. And I just had to squash it. I was a little harsh, but the moment called for it. It just was a situation. It was literally sitting there watching someone being horribly mentally abusive, and it was on my property as well. And so, you know what? Sometimes you got to do it, and it works out really well for either the immediate situation. And sometimes that's the only thing that alerts that person, right, to, oh my God, because someone else has voiced what they're feeling inside on a regular basis. Not that she left her guy because of your comment, but I'm just saying sometimes it can lead to really great things.
Well, and I also think it's important to understand that, I had a very good friend who was a psychologist one time, and she said to me, the biggest challenge when you're dealing with someone like that, she goes, is they can't separate their self-worth from their behavior. So she said, when you're critical of their behavior,
Right.
which is what I was doing there, I was criticizing his behavior because he was ruining the evening for everybody. They think you're attacking their self-worth. And in that situation, I wasn't. What I was looking at was I felt bad for his wife. The woman that I was there with was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. And I thought there is just no reason for this. And I think that, what I was hopeful for was that the next time, it's like, I remember when I was a kid, I'd never been punched in the nose. I don't know how old I was, maybe 8 years old. And there was a kid across the street who, had a tough life, and he was really a nice kid. And we got into this thing, and my older sister was there, and I was pinging on this kid, and I deserved to be hit, and I was pinging on him, and he told me to stop 2 or 3 times, and I didn't. And then he hauled off and just punched me in the nose. And I never forgot that, because what I realized was there's a consequence. There's a consequence. Mm-hmm. And, if you just keep stepping over the line, sooner or later, somebody's going to bite back. And so after that, I never did that again with anybody, because I thought you just don't know who you're messing with. And, and so I thought, this is obviously this guy is a grown man, and nobody's ever said to him, enough, stop. So for me, that was what I was trying to accomplish. But I thought, if I do it in a very timid way or a polite way, he's going to bowl over me. So I'm going to have to really hit him hard and not stop until I'm done. And so that was what I did. So hopefully, I don't know, I never
You're
saw
one
the
of
guy
my, now you just literally, I've interviewed over 500 people, but so much of what you've said, because I know we're not talking about this particular topic, but what is coming out of your mouth, and I want really people to hear this, is a level of supreme confidence that is really important in life. And you are practically just speaking from my mind and my mouth on a lot of these things. And I love to hear it. So I just wanted to say, I'm loving this. Yeah. And it's very, what it is? It's also very direct communication, which is the most authentic, and authenticity reigns supreme. And I'm really feeling that from you. And I love that. But I know we don't have too much time left. And I would love to get into this topic of experiencing the relationship between the heart and the brain.
Okay. Well, heart math is, they're over 3 decades into it. I think probably almost 35 years now. And it's amazing technology.
Tell people what heart math is.
Well, heart math is looking at, in the early 90s, the neurocardiologist found out that the heart has the equivalent of a brain. It has a nervous system, it has memory. And when they started looking at the communication traffic between the brain and the heart, what they found was about 75 to 80% of the communication is the heart actually talking to the brain, not the other way around. Now, this is of course, a paradigm buster, because we always thought the seat of our consciousness is in our brain. Well, no, it isn't. The seat of your consciousness is in your heart. And the heart, it puts out an electrical field, and that field that they used to say maybe 3 feet, but they confessed that was a limitation of the equipment that they had. So what is in that field is data, and that data is who you are, how you think, how you feel about this situation, how you feel about the person that you're with, how, your concept of yourself. It's encoded into this electromagnetic energy that is going out of you. And so they have found that when the heart and the brain are in what they call coherence, where if you look at, people say, well, I got 80 beats a minute heart rate. Well, it's not a metronome. If you look at it on a screen, and all of this stuff is it's all peer-reviewed science. It's not foo-foo stuff. It's stuff that it's they can look at it on an MRI. They can see what's going on. They can look at the color code changes. And what they found is 80 beats a minute, the beats can be precisely in coherence, meaning when the heart and the brain are in coherence, that beat is happening at a very equal interval. If it could also be bump, 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 or it could be bump, 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 and anywhere in between there. So there is this state of coherence that we can get into. And when you learn how to do it, it only takes a minute or so to do it. Then what happens is you have access to all of this cognitive abilities that you don't normally. Your decision making goes up, your peripheral thinking goes out, all these things happen. And this is what I find so fascinating about this, is that they have taken people that are what I'll call they're very practiced, they're skilled at coherence, getting into coherence. And they have done things where they have put, like, say, 3 people in a room and had them get into coherence. And then they take somebody who knows nothing about heart math, nothing about coherence, and they can put monitors on them, because they have very inexpensive equipment that you can practice getting into coherence with, and a smartphone app or an iPad app that it's an iOS app, and they can take somebody that knows nothing about any of this, and they can look at the monitor, and it shows that they're completely out of coherence. And that happens if you're in fight or flight or stress or anything. When they go into this room, they go into coherence because they're in the energetic field of these other 3 people that are in coherence. So what the ramifications of that are just, they're amazing, because what it's showing is that, when you're in a room full of angry people, you're going to be angry. Your heart, basically, your heart is talking to their heart. What they said is the nervous system is designed to hear this communication, to feel this communication. And this is, one of the things that I tell people is, look, electricity has been around since time began. It would have heated your house or cooled your house or lit your light bulbs 2,000 years ago, but they just didn't know it existed. It doesn't mean it wasn't there and it couldn't be used. And that's what this heart math technology is. It's this stuff has been going on as long as humans have been here. We just didn't know. This is one of the problems with empirical science, because empirical science always needs technology to prove to produce the data to prove its perspective. So in other words, you can't prove there's bacteria if you don't have a microscope to look into. Like I go, yeah, you see it there, you didn't know it was there, on your hands, but there it is, so now we have this technology, and this is one of the things I talked about in the beginning of the interview, is that we have this technology that is showing us that we have this connection with the people around us and within ourselves. Like when we're in coherence, our immune system goes way up in terms of its strength and its abilities. Our cognitive thinking goes, all these things happen, and we can learn to activate that on demand and reset our coherence when it gets out of whack with just a few minutes. And so it's just to describe how the app works. You put this thing on your earlobe, it just clips to your earlobe, and it senses your coherence, whether your brain and heart are in coherence, and it shows this thing that's going along. And so what puts you in coherence? Interestingly enough, it's thoughts of gratitude, gratitude of what's good in your life, the people that in your life that you love, the things that make you happy. When you begin to think on those things, your mind, body, your heart, brain go into coherence. When you're angry, ticked off, and you're thinking, you're dwelling on the things that you don't like, you go out of coherence. So this is it's a fascinating technology, and I could talk about it for quite a long time because it's really important. But like I said, you listen, you do this, and you start thinking these thoughts. And I have done this where I've put the sensor on people, and you can see this running graph because it's all in real time. You can see whether they're in coherence or not. And you can just put them in front of a television, and you can watch them just go wildly out of coherence just by the visual stimulus that they're seeing, or the music they're listening to, like all sorts of stuff, or the way someone is talking to them. If it's a very caring and gentle way, they'll go into coherence. If you're yelling at them, they go out of coherence. So this is it's like I said, it's all peer-reviewed, science-backed. They've been researching this stuff for years. It's very deep, and it has tremendous implications.
I love it. Okay, before we wrap it up, we'll put everything in the show notes to connect with you. But everybody, you have to check out his new book, but definitely go to tomsterner.com. That's STERNER, and go check out his new book, It's Just a Thought. Also, you coach people. So, and I see that you give people a sort of little strategy session, a free strategy session. So check out Tom's work if you feel like you've been a self-victim of this mind going haywire and want to, like you said, start enjoying living life. What else would you like to leave our audience with before we go?
I think that the biggest thing is understanding that if you're not thinking your thoughts, you're not free. And that, to me, that is what deliberate thinking is. If you're not making the choices as to what thoughts you're going to think, and understand that we spend 98% of our time accomplishing our goals. So it makes a lot of sense to learn to want to be in the process and to fall in love with the process of becoming who you want to be, instead of thinking, when I reach this point out here, because that's the way marketing works. You're not happy, but when you reach this thing over here, that happiness will be there. Well, it never is, because you just drop something else into that slot, that you have to have. So to me, falling in love with the process of becoming a deliberate thinker is where you want to be, because then you're always in the state of, you're like I wrote in The Practicing Mind, at what point in a flower's life is it perfect? Is it perfect when it's a seed? The flower could be like, it's a perfect flower seed at that point. It could be like, this absolutely stinks. I got to push my way through all this crappy mud and everything to get to the surface. I mean, it could be thinking like its interpretation could be that. Or is it when it pokes its head through the soil? Is it when it blooms? It's always perfect at being a flower in that state of a flower's life. And so when you can learn to look at your practice of becoming more, because perfection is infinite expansion, when you can look at yourself like that, and stop feeling like, if I could just get to here, wherever that is, then I'll be happy. Now, you're supposed to feel that way. The reason you're supposed to feel that there's more is because there is more. Like that's what perfection is. It's unlimited. It's not anything else is a limitation. It's a number. It's a limitation. And so you're supposed to feel what we misinterpret this feeling of incompleteness. The incompleteness is just to say there is no limit. There is no limit to what you can accomplish and who you can be. That's what the incompleteness is supposed to be telling us. We just misinterpret it into saying, I got to get that particular car so this feeling goes away.
Love it. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your time spent with us today. And really appreciate you stopping by. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products. And I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.